need to retaliate. I did nothing to you, but I'm going to. If you make a point of it, you make a point of it, you make a point of it, I'll make a point of it too.
One of those Uris is going out of place at the moment.
Great. But I've got two of them. Yeah. Two D58s. The Sennheiser 602.
What's that? Oh, for the kick.
Very nice.
Okay. What was it? Bangers or?
And I've got that.
Yeah, remember to put that back in the kitchens.
Yeah. On the tiles. Let's get the.
I'm a bit worried about that writing board and where the toms are.
Yeah,
it's going to have to like. Well, it's just going to be.
Yeah. You're not going to do the.
If we can get that, Sontronics in here.
Yeah. What's the cool place to have it? Is sort of there, pointed at the snare.
The what? No, I'm talking about the Sontronics.
Oh, sorry.
For the marking. Right.
Yeah.
Just get it away from that. We can get it away from that symbol. Get that one on the.
Round further back.
Round and further around. So they're at least sort of just try and get them at least 6 inches away from that symbol.
Yeah.
If we can get a 57 and all KM on the top of the snare.
Okay. Yeah.
That would be good.
Okay, cool.
And then we can compare and contrast your Sennheiser 8.
And that, yeah, I'd be interested to do that actually.
I've got those, yeah, those are sounding really good.
Right.
Through the Uris.
Yeah. Is What, doing a lot with the Uris, or?
Yeah, quite a lot.
telly lane. I did nothing to you, but I'm going to. If you make a point of it, you make a point of it, you make a point of it, I'll make a point of it too.
I like it. It sounds good. Okay. Well, here we are then, up at the Riverside Studio in the main live room. Damien has set his drum kit up, and we've put our kind of first attempt at the microphones up. And invariably, this will change a little bit as we go through the day, but I'll show you where we kind of start off. And we've put lots of mics up, so we've kind of covered all the available, outcomes. So come down to the kick drum. Have a look here. You can see there's a mic shoved right inside there. That's just a bog standard Shure SM57, and I've got that right up on the inside of the skin, so it gets the real kind of clickety click of the beater if we want to go a bit kind of rock on the kick drum. We've got this Sennheiser. I'm not sure which one this is. This belongs to Tom, our engineer here. I often use a D112 egg mic, the AKG. So we'll find out from Tom what this is. This is the cone of an NS10 speaker, and we use that to get a little bit of the sub-bass frequencies off of the drum. So we kind of got click, punch, and whoomph down the bottom, and it normally works quite well. Just moving up here, you can see that we've got it's a 67. Tom's put this one in here. He likes putting mics in there just to get a little bit of general kind of kittiness and racket going on. So that's obviously quite good. You can see on the toms we've got condensers. These are Sontronics Orpheus, and wicked little mics actually. Switchable pattern. These are set to cardioid, and we've got them quite close down on the skin. I find that they're really good at picking up the hard transients of the tom hits. We haven't got anything underneath the toms at the moment. I think that's probably going to be fine. And quite important in the kit setup is the overhead mics, and I'm using a pair of SE ribbon mics. I'm using those. I like the character they have. They're kind of quite smooth sounding. They have a lot of punch, and they just sound quite real when you just put them up and listen between the speakers. It instantly sounds quite natural. So I'm hoping we're going to get most of our sound through those. I've put them up through a pair of Neve clone mic amps, a pair of Vintex, and compressed them through some Yuri 1176s. So most of our kit sound should come through those, and hopefully we can use the spot mics just to kind of tune the character of the kit a little bit. Tom, what's the Sennheiser kick mic called?
E602.
E602. There you have it. Oh, snare drum. What's the model? KM86. This is the KM86. We can see that right here. I often use 57s on the top and bottom of the snare. We've got beaters on today, which Tom likes particularly because they're a bit more unidirectional. And we've got the KM87, which is an old Neumann, which is I've used brilliantly on acoustic guitars before. But I wanted to try a condenser on the snare today as well as the Shure, so we're going to give that a go. And then we've got a AKG C451 on the hat. Fairly usual. So nothing really unusual there. I think what we'll do is we'll get some big ambient mics up way off towards the back of the room for a bit of bigness, and see what it sounds like.
Take a photo, find room for another love.
The best thing about coming somewhere like this is the fact that we can play all the music back to Dame through this monitoring system, where he's got his own mixing desk, so he can balance his own drums, different elements of the backing track, and even do his own panning and EQ, and that's going to make it much easier for him to just get comfortable. And that's quite often the hardest thing when you're trying to do it at home or somewhere that's, you know, a bit makeshift. So hopefully we'll see this in action in 2 seconds. Okay, nice one, Tom, there. Let's actually get some headphones on. I'll run the backing track and we'll see what's coming up where.
Pair and then rest of the track up a stereo pair and then click on.
There'll be bass, guitars, vocals, click and drums.
Wicked, man.
Hopefully.
Every tune.
Stereo bass and stereo guitars.
What's this again? I don't know really. You think it's something you like piss around with it and make different sounds come out of it? The game? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the guitars and the bass are a stereo. You can pan them left and right. I hope, probably. I don't know. I'm not quite sure where they are, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it looks like there's the same on both tracks. Just pan them left and right.
Drum kit.
On A and B, I'm not quite sure where that is. Hang on, I'll stop the.
That's all turned now. No, it's on. Yeah. It's on the click track. I've got the click, and then the more the drum kit comes up.
Yeah, we were quite careful with the positioning.
Right.
Remember, I stood by the snare.
Yeah.
Came out like that. Yeah. So it's just going through. It's going through a pair of those Vintech. These are a clone of Neve. I think 1072 or 1272 mic amps. These boys actually. And then it's going through a pair of 1176s. There. A very short release time, medium attack, quite a lot of input, and quite a high ratio. But we'll leave it like that for a bit and then get some spot marks going, innit?
So you use that as the kind of basis of what you're going to build from.
Hopefully that those overheads will kind of give us the kind of symbols and the detail of the track, and then we can kind of like with the spot mics and the kick and snare, we can decide how much kind of kind of weight we want behind it. But we'll see. We'll have to see. You never know till all the mics are up and until the track's going. But that's a good start. So we'll just we'll go through each of the mics so you can hear what they're sounding like at the moment. These are the ribbon overheads. So you can hear they're getting a lot of just the general kit, but particularly the snare and the cymbals. Now inside the kick drum we've got the kick 57, which I've EQ'd. It's mainly just a click, which sounds a bit crappy on its own, but here's the Sennheiser that's kind of the main body of the sound. So with the two together, you get that nice clicky kick sound. And then the sub, which you probably won't get too much of on this little microphone here, but that's the real bottom end. So we can feel it though, can't we, Will, when we bring that in. So that's the kick drum mics. Underneath the snare, 57. On top, the 57. I mean, quite a lot of EQ. I've EQ'd a lot of bottom end into that. That's what it is, flat. That's it. That's the top and bottom snare mics. I think I've got the top mic out of phase at the moment. We'll check that. And I've also got the Neumann, which is kind of, again, it's a bit of a, it's got a warmer sound. I think it's a bit of the hat and snare there, but I think it's nice. We probably won't need too much of the hat mic, which is there. But it's nice to have it in case we do a section where we just want that hat on its own or something. We've got that there. Toms. That's the floor tom there. And the rack. Peeking out a bit there, I'll just bring those down. We've got the 67, which is kind of in the middle of the kit, doing some general stuff. We've got a PZM in the kitchen and a TLM somewhere else. So those two make quite a nice ambient pair. And then we've got the Earthworks, which is right up in the far corner of the kitchen, giving us a very distant sound. So all of them together. So our next job is to get those mics routed out to Pro Tools and get them balanced up, bring them back so they sound a little bit like that, and then we can get them in playing along with the backing track. So we've got a sound up on the kit, and I'm going to just press play. Damien's down there; he's got the mix coming through. And let's see how it's going to go.
up and made me sink so low. Stay there. Well, I'm sorry for misunderstanding you. There was no need to retaliate. I did nothing to you, but I'm going to. If you make a point of it, you make a point of it, you make a point of it, I'll make a point of it too. Step hands in your
I like it. It sounds good. Okay, stay put, man. That's good. I think we'll just do a few more takes. Hi, welcome to Rock Masterclass Part 2. I am the master. This is the class. Last week we recorded a drum kit upstairs. We had the bones of a track sketched out. We went upstairs with Damien, marked up a kit really well, got a great drum sound, did a couple of takes, didn't do much work on it, just stitched it together, cherry picked a couple of fills, but basically Dame did a great job. So we had the good backbone for a track. So this week's all about the guitars, guitar and bass really, and what we're going to cover is the 3 or 4 different ways that we can record guitar. Especially because we're in a small studio, we're working with a computer, so it's basically going to be about DIing, but I'm also going to show you how to mic up an amp, how to use a hardware cab simulator. We're going to talk a bit about amp modelling, amps like the Line 6 Veta, and we're also going to talk about plugins and how you can use those. I'm going to show you around my pedal board and tell you about why I use all sorts of different types of distortions. And then we're going to put the guitar track together, and you'll see how I put the thing together in layers, starting with a kind of basic clean track, adding some dirty ones for the chorus, pairing tracks, using clean sounds, and also how to get kind of good feedback effects when you're just working in one room and you haven't got a great big amp to crank up. And then we'll end up with the bass and guitars done along with our drum track, and hopefully ready for part 3, which is going to be about the vocals. So enjoy. Right, so let's start at the very beginning then, with the simplest recording chain of all. First things first, if you want a guitar. And you know, it's really a good idea to get hold of the best guitar you can get, because the signals are stronger and cleaner, the intonation is going to be better, the sound's going to be better. The nicer the guitar you've got, the easier it is to play, and if you've kind of cobbled together a bunch of gear to do your guitar session, borrow as many guitars as you can, you know, from the best to the worst. I've got a real crappy old Woolies guitar, which I'll show you later, which I use all the time if you really want it to sound wonky, and if I really want to do some stuff that's strong and stable and clean and clear, then I'll use something like this, which is an old Gibson Les Paul. And you know, once you tune them up, they're pretty stable, and you're not going to have any problems. You know, you're not going to have horrible noises and crackles and hums and squeaks and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, get hold of the best gear you can get. And you know, the simplest way of starting really is just to kind of plug your guitar into an amp and record that, which is what we've got set up at the moment. So here we are then. Guitar and amplifier, and I'm just going to go for now straight from the guitar into the amp, just to check that everything's alright. The guitar's on, the amp's up pretty loud, I've got no horrible hums or anything like that. It's a clean signal, the guitar's a bit out of tune, but we'll sort that out. And that's a good starting point. And as is often the case with guitar amps, especially old ones like this, the more you crank them, the better a kind of sound you're going to get. So I'll turn it up. This might distort the sound on the camera a little bit, but here you go. love that sound. Right, so guitar and amp, that's your starting point, and that's working, and that's fine. Now there's a few other things that we want to take into consideration here. We're recording digitally, and that gives us loads of options. And what I always think is a really good idea to do is record a DI out of the guitar, alongside any other kind of amp or distorted signals you've got. And so for that you'll need a DI box, which basically is a little box like this that sits between the guitar and the amplifier. So instead of plugging into the amp, I plug into the DI box. The DI box plugs into the amp. So I'm back again, but now I've got a balanced feed out of the DI box into whatever I'm recording onto. So the idea of getting a DI'd signal is that it boosts the signal from a little kind of tiny signal from the pickups, which if you just plug straight into the audio interface or into your sound card is going to be very small and very susceptible to interference. The DI box turns it into a nice balanced, strong mic level signal, and then I can use a channel like my Focusrite here to plug it into, so I can get a good healthy input signal. Not too healthy there. And make sure that all my EQ and everything is flat. I don't want any treatment on this. I want this to be as clean and clear as possible. Set my output level so we're not peaking and I'm really giving it some welly. It goes without saying, you always want to try and use the best interfaces that you've got, and this is a Prism. This is one of the best interfaces you can get. That's a Focusrite, beautiful mic amp, onboard EQ and compression. So that's a real top quality signal chain, and you'll be glad of that when you want to use this DI later, because it's going to be as if you had the guitar plugged in and you were playing it again. Once you've got your DI signal safe and sound into the computer, you're going to want to record the amp, and the traditional way of doing that is with a microphone, or 2 or 3 microphones. And I'm going to show you what I normally do here. This is what I found to be the safest way of capturing a sound. Because you're really close micing the cab, you don't really get the effects of the room that you're in. So if you're working in a kind of pokey room or a garage or somewhere that doesn't sound very nice acoustically, that won't matter too much if you close mic like this. One mic would be enough, and this is a Shure SM57, and it just gives a very crisp and clear sound with lots of nice top end detail in it. But I've over the years got into the habit of using 2 in a particular way where I think it actually gives a fuller sound. And as you can see, what I've done is I've got 157 facing pretty much straight on to just off the centre of the cone, and I've got another one coming in at a 45-degree angle with the capsules as close together as I can get. So now we've got 3 signals to be recorded. Now, if you've got a mixing desk, you can bring these mics up your mixing desk, and you can deal with the two signals, combine them and record them as one. What I'm going to show you today is how to do it without a mixing desk. I'm going to record both these mics separately into the computer, and that will give me a chance to show you what the relationship between the 2 mics should be. Okay, so here we are. You can see our 3 signals here. We've got the guitar DI, the guitar 57 number 1, and guitar 57 number 2. Now I'm just having a quick tune by using a plug-in tuner here. And quite a good tip, really, when you're doing a guitar session, is to try and use the same tuner all the way through the session for bass and for guitar and for keyboards. If you've got wonky old synths, just try and use the same tuner, and then that way you won't run into trouble, because it's surprising the differences between different tuners. They're not all the same, and it sounds pretty hideous when stuff isn't in tune. So we've got 3 guitar signals here. Let's just record a little bit of that. Right, I'll show you what to do with those 2 57s. Let's have them coming out and output where we can hear them, first of all. Now that's one of the 57s, right? That's the one that's facing straight onto the cone. Here's the one at 45 degrees. Now together they sound like this. Play a little bit of this and take one of them out. I'll take the 45 degree one out and bring it back in again so you can hear the difference with and without. It's not just getting louder and quieter, it's actually expanding the spectrum of the sound out. You're getting more top end. There's a good way of finding out what the natural balance of these 2 guitars is, and we do it by using phase. I'll show you what we do. We put a trim plug-in on both of these channels, and we'll put the 45 degree mic out of phase. Now when we play them back, I'm going to adjust the volume of that 45 degree mic until the sound is at its thinnest. I'll show you what I mean. Let's turn it down first. Right, it's round about where it naturally was really. You can just hear the sound thinning out a little bit. Yeah, when you found the spot where it is at its thinnest, which is, I think it's about 0 dB actually. When you found that spot, flip the phase back to normal and you should have a big fat sound then. Very crisp, and the bottom end is quite nice and solid there. The other option you've got with an amp like that that's an open backed cab is that sometimes it's nice to put a mic around the back as well, and that mic will normally go out of phase to the mics that are around the front. If you think about it, the speaker's doing this and there's a microphone here, so if there's a microphone at the back, obviously when it's going towards that mic it's going away from this one, so you flip the phase to give a good strong signal, and that actually sounds great. You can do some fun panning things with those 2 signals as well. Let's just check our DI signal and see if that's okay. Yeah, that's exactly what the signal sounds like coming straight out of the guitar. So at a later date we can either put an amp simulator plug-in over that, or we can actually send it back out to an amplifier again, or to effects pedals or stomp boxes or anything. So what that gives us is options, which is great. Now, if you're working at home or in a small room, you might not have the luxury of being able to play your amp nice and loud and record it with microphones. If you're in a good room, you can have your close mics, a mic around the back. You can also have a real nice condenser over here somewhere, or even distant ambient mics, and it helps give a lovely airy sound. But that's a luxurious situation, and it's sometimes difficult, even in this room, to make a lot of noise if there's stuff going on adjacently. So there are other ways and means of using an amp, but getting it down, recorded well. This is a Palmer speaker simulator. It's quite old now, quite hard to find, but what it does is that you plug the output of the amplifier into this rather than into the speakers, and it gives you a balanced output straight into the amp with a few kind of tonal variations and some level control as well. And I'll show you what they sound like. They actually sound brilliant. But you must remember never to run your amp without a load on the speaker. So I'm going to turn it off first and disconnect the speaker and replace it with this. So that's in there. Let's get a little speaker connector. Double check I'm doing the right thing. There we are. So I'll come out of the amplifiers into the speaker input. Now I can power back on. And stick the amp on. And I'll show you what it sounds like. So the speaker simulator is plugged in, and oh dear, a bit out of tune again. The great thing about this is now I've got no noise coming out of the amplifier at all. I'm just coming out of the cab simulator straight into the computer via a little Focusrite Octo Pre down the bottom, which is just a very simple set of mic amps. But of course, now that now I can turn everything down, I can crank the amplifier up, and we can get all that lovely valve distortion. It's purely the amp, no pedals or anything. Always a good starting point for a dirty sound, and we're not upsetting anybody, which is really great. So, if you're mad keen on recording guitars through amps, try and find one of these or something like it, because they make the whole process a hell of a lot easier. And actually, a lot of the time, just for ease, I'll use that over microphones, unless I'm looking for a sound where I want lots of ambience and loud speakers and feedback. I'll use this because it sounds great. There's nothing missing from the sound. It's bright and it's warm and it's full, and it just sounds like a brilliantly mic'd cab. So no problem really. So once you've got the amp simulator and or the speaker simulator rather, and your DI both going to the computer, you can record a little bit of that. And what you end up with is a really great natural amped guitar sound. And of course we've still got our DI for anything else we want to do. So that's real amps. Now we can have a look at some unreal amps and some Line 6 modelers that I've got here, and we can have a look at some plugins as well, and because using a real amp isn't the only way to get your sound done. While an old Marshall Bluesbreaker is a beautiful amp with a beautiful tone and kind of clear sound and a warm valvey crunch, it only really does that one sound, and you can improve that a lot with lots of different stomp boxes and effects pedals. Another option is something like this. You must have seen the little Line 6 pods, the red kidney-shaped simulators, that red and black, and what they do them for bass and they do them for guitar. They come in a little stand on the desk form and they come in a little rack form. And this is like a pair of those with their own power amp and a couple of speakers. And the immediate benefits of that is that you can go straight into kind of weird and wonderful world. Straight away you've got a whole load of wonky effects to play with. You've got a whole different bunch of amp simulations in here, a whole different bunch of cabinet simulations, and you can pretty much approximate any guitar sound you want within about 5 minutes of playing with one of these. And the other brilliant thing about it is, of course, you can save your sound and come back to it later. So if you're working on a song, you can make a note of the sound, and if you don't like it, you can go back, dial up your sound again and drop straight in and fix it, which is a lot more difficult when you've got an old amp like that and a big pile of pedals. It's virtually impossible. So, and of course the other great thing is as well, is that you can just turn the speakers off once you've got a sound you like. There you are, straight direct into your sequencer. Hundreds of sounds to play with straight away. I use these all the time really, because they're a brilliant time saver, and they're really good live too, because you've got a pedal where all the song titles come up. But what it does lack is a little bit of that kind of warmth that you get, and when you're kind of stacking up distorted guitar parts, which we're going to do in our track, something like this is great because it can very quickly give you lots of different colours of sound. But the minute that the guitar becomes very exposed and it's a single part or there's lots of space, I'm not quite so sure that the sound of these is better than the old Marshall. And they have a kind of papery thinness to them sometimes that I can recognise quite quickly now, so I'm so used to listening to them in comparison with those. So it depends on what job you're doing. I'm lucky enough to have them both here. But if I had to probably pick one to do everything, as much as I love the sound of the old Marshall, I might have to pick something like this because it saves you time, you can take it out live, it switches all the different sounds you want, it's got a bunch of effects built into it and a tuner, and it's not quite as temperamental, so you'd have to make your own mind up about that. The last option we got for getting our guitars down, if we haven't got any kind of amp at all, is to use a plug-in. And these are great. Here's Amplitude, and like the Veta, it's got a whole bunch of amp models and a whole bunch of cab models and loads of effects, loads of good presets which give you a good starting point for sounds. And like the Veta, you can store all the sounds you use for each track. It means that you can keep your sound completely liquid right up until the point where you mix. And the advantage it has over everything else is that you can automate parameters. Let's say that you decide you want to add a little bit of extra distortion in the chorus. If you just play it back, something. I'll just record that move in live, and from now on, the distortion will automatically come on. And I can edit all that automation and just move the point where the pedal comes on slightly before, slightly afterwards, and really have a huge amount of control over the sound. So plugins have actually got a hell of a lot going for them, and if you've got your computer set up well enough, then the latency should be perfectly alright to play with. I can feel a little bit of a lag there, but weighed against all the advantages of a plugin, it's fine, and I do use them a hell of a lot. So what we should do now is have a look at our track and see what kind of sounds we're going to use for that. this is my pedal board, and as you can see there's a whole pile of pedals here and they mostly do the same thing, which is distortion. And the reason there's so many is because there's so many little different flavours and types of distortion, and especially with different combinations you can get some quite unique sounds. Now this has been put together professionally, and the power supplies all match the pedals, and the levels are kind of consistent throughout. I mean, what I often used to find, I had all my pedals, I'd cobble them together with any old kind of patch lead I could find, and horrible power supplies where you could switch between the voltages and polarities, and it used to just sound hideous. I used to have humming and squeaking, and it'd cut out halfway through if I knocked it with my foot, and all this kind of thing. So eventually we got this sorted out here, and it's great because it's just quick and easy, and they all work straight away. And I thought I'd just show you why there are so many different types of pedal here. I'm going straight into the amp. We're listening via the cab simulator over there, so we've got a semi-clean kind of sound on the Marshall, so you can see what some of these different distortions are. And first up we've got an octabass here. I'll put a distortion with that. So that's what that does. Hotcakes. Big muff. They all have their slight different EQ curves. This is a little Zvex pedal from America. Evil. This is a rat. Very simple, straightforward, thin kind of sound. See, they're all different. And you can find the right one that's going to work in your mix, or depending on the part you're going to play. These are particularly evil. What's the point of that? You may well ask. Well, we actually use it on the bass for this track, so we'll see about that later. And this is the Octane. Both of those just do pure trash. Isn't that disgusting? And I love it. And there is a place, believe me, for that kind of disgusting sound. So what we've got here is a really good palette of colours to use. And, of course, it might work out that you've got the wrong guitar for the part. The Les Paul is great, you know, for thick, beefy stuff like that, but it's not so good for simple kind of scratchy rhythm parts. So you might find that a different guitar has more the vibe that you need. You know, that's the sort of sound more of your current British guitar band. Yeah, just pretty clean, really. So, like I said, get hold of as many guitars as you can, and as many pedals and things as you can, and try and get the sound closest at source to what you're looking for, and then you won't have to muck around so much when it comes to the mix. When it comes to recording a DI from your guitar, you're going to need a DI box. A basic DI box always looks something like that. There's a jack input, a balanced XLR output, and then a further jack output. So your guitar plugs in here, this goes out to whatever your mic amp is, and then your guitar signal carries on from here out to your amp. And there's normally a couple of options on there. You can lift the earth, there's a hum, you can reverse the phase of the signal. And this one has got a couple of little filters and an attenuator built in as well. Some of them are even simpler. And this will run from phantom power. So that it's a really good investment. You can use it for all sorts of things, bass and keyboards as well. So that's a simple DI box. Now there's something you can get a step on from that, and this is called a buffered, a powered DI system, and it's made by a chap called Al Smart. I first discovered these when I was working at Real World Studios just down the road in Box here. And the problem I used to have was I want to record, I want to sit in the control room and play my guitar, and I wanted my amp to be in a room down the hall somewhere with microphones on it. And by the time I had a really long guitar lead, the guitar would sound dull by the time it got to the amp, and I'd often get hums and interference. And what the guys at Real World used to do was use a set of these where you've got a transmit box and a receive box. When the transmit box is powered, and what happens is you plug your guitar in here and you make a connection between this box and this box, which can be a long way away, and the signal is somehow secretly amplified and made interference proof, sent down a normal mic cable to this box, and then at either end you can either take signals out to amplifiers or take signals out to wherever you want, really, balanced or unbalanced. And it really is a brilliant system, because you could have this in your live room and you can run several different amplifiers simultaneously off of it, and all the time you're not losing any signal from your guitar. So these are well worth checking out, and again, these are made by Al Smart, and I don't know anyone else who actually makes them. So we're ready to start tracking our track. And the first thing I want to do is put down just one simple part throughout the song that's going to map it out for me and give me a starting point to hang some of the guitars off later. Now what I'm doing, I'm choosing the telly, and I'm just using the one side of the Jacqueline Hyde over here through the amp. It's the kind of sound that if I play softly, it's still quite musical. I can hear all the notes, but if I give it a bit of wailing, it distorts a bit. So it's a good starting point. So I'll put up the session. I've got the drums we recorded last time. I'm trying to remember the song, and I'm going to put a take of it down. Yes, I am. And I'm recording the DI as well, at the top. So I've managed to stumble my way through the arrangement of the song. I've done a couple of drop-ins and edits, and here's what we've got. Jazzy sound for the verses, and in the true Blue Peter spirit, here's one I made earlier. What I've actually done is played the part twice. I've got the sounds panned left and right, and we get a thicker kind of sound like this. that's my kind of core take for the song. What I want to do now is get a really mental fuzz guitar sound going just for the choruses. So it's back to the pedal board for that. I want to get a really thick distorted sound for the chorus. So I've gone back to the Les Paul and I'm going to use the muff for a bit of dirt and filth. Some people say it's a bad idea to pile lots of guitars onto a track and do left and rights, but at the moment I completely disagree, and I think it's great to put loads of guitars on so it sounds really huge. But you know, the choice is yours. But let's put a pair of these on and see what it sounds like.
Okay.
So I've put a pass of this on the first chorus, added it in. Let's have a look. On their own they sound like this. And together with the guitars we've already done, starting to sound really nice and juicy now. So that's pretty good. I'm going to put one more layer of utter filth on there, and then we should have a think about doing the bass. Right, so we've done a couple of guitar parts. We've got a main kind of moderately dirty guitar. We've got a pair of fuzzed Les Pauls in the chorus, and you know, to be honest, that's fine. It sounds pretty huge enough as it is. But I'm just going to cross the line into poor taste now, just because I like the sound of guitars like this. So I've put a pair of these hideous sounding guitars on. I love the high frequencies of those. It's really kind of scratchy at the top. Goes in, here it is with the muffs. And with everything now. That's sounding great to me, a big stinking pile of guitars. This one, I used the Les Paul again. And I've been using the Octane. Just sounds like a broken 4-track or something. That's just personal preference though, I don't advise that. You'll hear the result when you have the finished mix and see what you think. So I've got the main rhythm guitars on for the track, and I've got some extra stuff on for the chorus. I'm going to put the bass on now just to fill out the bottom end. Just to see what's happening with that, and then that will give me a picture of what else I need. Now I haven't got a bass amp here to mic up, and even if I did it would probably be too loud, so again we're going to try a DI situation. I'm going to use the same signal chain as I have with the guitar, so I'm going to use the Marshall amp there in the cab simulator. I've got a Music Man Stingray here, which is a really nice bass. It's capable of lots of different sounds. I've just got kind of everything up, nice toppy sound at the moment. Like with the guitars, it's worth, unless you're going for a deliberately wonky kind of, you know, shit disco sort of feel, get hold of a good bass, because when the root notes voice strongly and clearly, it will really give the track a backbone, and it will help seat the bottom end nicely. You know, you'll find that if your intonation's out and notes aren't quite voicing right, it's just not going to help things be solid. So try and get hold of a decent bass if you haven't got one. But you know, what you've got to work with is what you've got to work with, isn't it? So here's a standard clean sound, and what I'd normally do is just maybe add a little bit of subtle. A little bit of drive and presence, just to kind of give it a little bit of extra fizz and vitality. But in pursuit of the filth that I'm in pursuit of for this track, I want this track to be pretty extreme. I don't want it to be a kind of polite, you know, rock track. I want it to be a bit bonkers. So I might try it. I might experiment with some sounds like that, work out how to get a bit more control over it, and it's a more synthy kind of sound in a way, and see what I can do with that. So I'm going to start off just having a look at the choruses of the song, see where that takes me. So this, believe it or not, is the chorus bass line. Filthy, I love it, and that's given me the kind of vibe that I wanted. And I tried this sound playing through the verses of the song, but it's just too much. So in the end I went for a much cleaner sound, and I played the part on the offbeat, and I used a little electro-harmonics bass synth pedal. I'll play you what that sounds like. I can't show you the sound because it broke 2 days ago and it's at the menders. But what I've done is I've used an envelope follower. So when I play the note, it opens a filter, so it goes wow, 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 and you can hear that. You can hear that sound here. And that's just offbeat throughout the verses like this. That helps give it a bit of a bounce through the verses. It means it's not everything so full on. So when it comes to the bridge and the chorus, we've got somewhere to go like this. So in general, I love it, but it's starting to get a bit full and a bit chock-a-block, so I need to organise the existing guitars I've got on the bass, and then just look at what additional guitar parts are needed. I think there might be something for the middle eight we could do that could be quite interesting. We want to try and create a bit of respite amongst all this mayhem. The kind of middle eight of the track was always designed to drop right down to a real soft part without drums and to kind of build back up for the last chorus. And it follows the same chord sequence as the intro. and which we think is going to be the intro. It's not totally decided yet, but I want to put together a very soft piece, and I've got this tremolo sound, the built-in tremolo on the Marshall, and what I've done is I've played 3 parts down that create all these chord movements, but without me kind of moving the chords like that. What you end up with is a sequence like this. Which is very nice, and if I listen with just the scratchy rhythm track, it sounds like this. And then I've put a little kind of high arpeggio line coming in here. There's a really nice little kind of journey there. And the only other thing I've done of any note really is I've created some bonkers feedback at the end. And that sounds like this. Which I think finishes it off very nicely. That ultimately will sit behind the vocals and just create an atmosphere of degenerate chaos, which is what we're after. So what we'll do is we'll have a quick rundown of the track, and I'll flick some of the guitars in and out, and we can just remind ourselves of what the hell we got there. One of the drawbacks of doing DI guitar can be that you lack a little bit of that excitement from a lot of sound being in the air, and certainly when you're stood near your amp, especially when you're playing live or rehearsing and you've got loads of filthy distortion on, the guitar will feedback quite naturally, and feedback is a kind of naturally exciting kind of sound, but it's quite difficult sometimes to get that when you're DIing stuff. And but it is possible to do it without having to blast hell out of the world. It's just normally down to choosing the right pickup and having the right amount of gain on the guitar, which is normally quite a lot, you know, but not too much. So got quite a saturated sound there, and even down at quite a low level. Start feeding back. It also helps to have like a humbucker guitar as well, quite a high output guitar. So I mean, it's quite nice sometimes to get the effect of when you're just about to come in, some feedback kicks on, you know. If you're monitoring quite loud, it can be done. It's just about getting the right amount of gain, and sometimes actually using the bassier pickup. So you can have all that excitement feedback, but you just need to experiment with your distortions and your monitoring, and And as well, if you're playing back with the track, just make sure you're monitoring yourself nice and loud. It's all kicking off there, but I could talk quite easily over that, so it's all about game, I think. Hello, and welcome to the next in our master classes of rock recording and mixing. Up until now, we've been recording a pretty hard and heavy track. We've done drums in the studio upstairs, and then we've come back down to our smaller kind of little production room where we've done bass and guitars. And today we've got to do all the vocals. There's no delaying it anymore. I've tried to get out of it, but the time's come. I've actually got to do it now. So we're going to look at how to get just a simple, straightforward vocal sound down without cocking it up. That's going to leave us room to process the sound afterwards. And I'm going to hopefully do one main vocal and then flesh it out with some different treatments, some double tracks and some harmonies, and do some octaves and maybe some kind of group backing vocals and things, just to kind of show how we're going to get a different vocal plot going all the way through the song. And then the only job after that is to make an intro. We're still lacking an intro, I think. And then all the recording will be done, and it'll be time to move on to the next part, which will be dealing with the mixing. So our first job is to get a vocal sound together. So here's how we're going to get our vocal sound onto tape. I'm going to use this Focusrite rack unit here, which is like a whole channel strip or signal path all in one box. It makes things really easy. And if you've seen the pop masterclass we did a few months ago, I've used this then as well. So it's constantly cropping up. I almost record everything through this actually. And what you've got is first of all a mic amp, then EQs, filters and parametrics. Then there's a compressor and an expander or a gate, and also a de-esser, which is quite good, especially when you're mixing. And recording vocals is really fairly simple. All you've got to make sure is that you get an undistorted signal onto tape. Don't over compress it, because it's difficult to undo that later. But of course you want to compress it a bit because you want to get a good level of signal onto tape. I say tape, but onto disc. So the first thing to do is have a look at your input level, and this is there, kind of peaking around 0. You can see if I really give it some stick, the overload light comes on a little bit, so I'll back it off because I know I'm going to be hollering a bit. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. So that's probably about right. That's monitoring the input there. And then a bit of basic EQ. I'll put the EQ in, I'll put the filter in, and I'm going to filter out everything below 60 Hz, 70 Hz, and just take the very top off there as well. And I'm going to leave the rest of the EQ flat. I mean, I've got a valve mic here, Gemini valve mic, and I quite like the sound of that. Okay, next we've got compression, and to monitor the effect of the compression, I'm just going to switch the meter here. This will show us the gain reduction. So obviously it's at 0 now. So hello, 1 2 1 2. You can see when I get really loud, whoop whoop, it turns it down. Now, I usually have a ratio of about 3 to 1. Let's have a look. That's there we go, about 3 to 1, something like that. I have quite a fast attack, and I use the auto release because it's just the same hassle. Set the threshold there. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 1 1 do 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 do. Now I normally set the threshold so it's beginning to act very slightly when I'm singing quite quietly. Do 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 do. I mean, when you're singing at your quietest, you actually don't want it to be doing anything. La 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 la. 1 2 1 2 1 2. La la la. 1 2 1 2. All right, so that's kind of kicking in a lot when it's quite loud and just doing a little bit when it's medium and nothing when it's soft, and that's about right. And again, the gate is more useful when we're mixing, because if you use it when you're recording, you know, even if the sound is a bit hissy and you have the gate set wrong, if you clip the starts of and ends of words, there's nothing you can do about it. So, you know, I tend to record with no gates. And again, the de-esser, I don't want to take the chance of misjudging it when you're actually recording. It can all be done after the event, as you'll see later. 1, 2. So all we've got to do now, 1, 2, is get the output level. Right, there's a gain makeup over here, which compensates for the compression. 1, 2, 1, 2. This is the meter that's counting here. This is what's going to go to tape. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's about right. And that's it. Everything else we can do once we've recorded. Well, the moment of truth is here then. Time to do the main vocal. We've got all the guitars, bass and drums done. We've got a big tough sounding track. So now it's time to put the vocal on. I'm going to use a valve mic here, Gemini, and which has a really good warm sound. And the room is quite good that I'm in here. It's quite dead. I've got a rug down here, so it's not going to pick up too much of the ambience. If you have got a kind of echoey room, or a room that doesn't sound very nice, you're probably using a dynamic mic like an SM58 or a 57 will get rid of some of that, and often sounds just as good as a valve mic. But I tend to use this one because I know the sound of it, and it's always just plumbed in here and ready to go. And in a minute I'll show you how to set up the vocal recording channel, which is just plumbed into one of our tracks on Pro Tools here. I've checked the level. 1, 2, 1, 2. So we're not going to distort, and we've got a good level there for the quiet stuff. 1, 2. So we're ready to go. Now, obviously I'm working on cans. I'm going to turn my monitors down. It can be nice really to have someone help you do this. It's nice to not have to worry about pressing record and stop start and doing all your own editing, but I'm used to just sitting here with my headphones on, doing it, tidying up, doing my own drop-ins and all that kind of stuff, so I'm quite happy doing that. And just be careful with monitoring levels in your headphones. Try not to have it too loud. It's difficult because sometimes it just feels a bit more exciting like that, but it's quite difficult sometimes to hear your pitching and all that kind of thing. And that's it really. So I'm going to put down one track of main vocal for the song. I think the lyrics I've got are okay. I think they're going to work out, but I'll know better once I've sung them. Normally something will crop up halfway through that doesn't feel quite right, so we can make an adjustment or two on the fly. But I'm going to do that now, so I shall see you on the other side. Well, I've done my vocal, and as you can see, I've ended up with one track. A few different regions here. What I did was sang the song through 3 or 4 times onto different tracks, and I listened through and picked the best bits of the takes that I liked and assembled them on one track here. And occasionally I've gone through and just taken out a little bit of noise and put some fades on just to tidy up, especially in the quieter sections of the song, like the middle 8, so I'm not hearing any kind of hiss and noise in the background. Doesn't matter so much when the rest of the song's playing. And sounds fine. I'm going to just put a couple of plugins on there, just a bit of extra compression. Now actually I use a multi-band compressor quite a lot. Now here it is. Here's a bit of the vocal.
Nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you.
Always a pleasure hearing your own dry soloed vocals. Horrible. Anyway, I use this multiband to take out a little bit of this part of the sound.
Nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness.
Because just with this kind of setup here, there does seem to be a bit of woolliness in the sound. So I've got this compressor which compresses at different frequency bands just to kind of keep a lid on that one a little bit, which takes some of the boxy tone out of the vocal. And then there's the next band up sounds like this.
Them, whatever I do, I fashion.
I normally give that a bit of a boost. and also I give a bit of a top end boost as well, which you might be able to hear, and it just gives an effect that I'm very fond of. Let's have a listen.
I do, I fashion the likeness, the essence of you. You're looking so much better since I did your hair and made you longer.
And immediately I've hoiked up the high frequencies. I can hear S's, so I'm going to use a de-esser.
Shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness.
Now you've got to be careful, you don't want to end up with a lift.
Shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you. You're
Such a good, this is a waves de-esser, the Renaissance de-esser. It's really, really good because it's actually quite hard to make it sound bad, but it is possible with some de-essers to end up with a lifting kind of effect, especially when the vocals sat in the mix. So, with a little bit of extra compression as well, it's just a very simple RVox compressor from Waves as well. Just to
when nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you.
So that's a good basic vocal sound. Now if I disable these plugins and play you the naked vocal sound.
When nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you.
Now I'll reactivate them.
When nothing will shake them, whatever I do.
So the effect is far more immediate in the room. It brings the vocal right into the centre of the picture and now should sit happily on top of the mix so I can hear what I've got.
When nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you. You're looking so much better since I did your hair and made you longer. It takes a little practice, you can do it at home. Some do it as a group, I think it's better alone. So get the head together and all the bits of body that move like your own.
So that's my main vocal, but I'm going to put more vocals with it. In fact, what I've done already is to put a low octave vocal alongside this one. Let's have a look at that. I'll just switch these plugs off a minute so you can hear.
When nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you.
Ow! Right, now I've got a similar kind of compression and de-essing going on that I've got on the main vocal. And so when the two are together, sound like this.
When nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you. You're looking so much better since I did your hair and made you longer.
So
Oh.
let's have a look what that sounds like in the mix.
All around the discos and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
So my idea is to try and create a balance between the high and low octaves so it's not exactly clear which one's which, it just sounds like one kind of odd voice. And I'm going to do that in the quiet sections and the verses. And then it's backing vocals, and which some of them I've sung and some of them Joe in the band has sung. Let's have a look at these. Now here I've double tracked the choruses. So a single voice is like this.
Stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your voodoo doll.
Now here's with the double track.
Stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins
effects on there as well, which I'll deal with when we come to the section of mixing. I'll go into those in a lot more detail, but the double tracking has a nice thickening effect on the vocal, and especially with all the guitars that we've got going on, it's really going to help the vocal come through. And then there's some harmony from Joe, which is like this.
Sticks, pins, and your voodoo doll. Sticks, pins, and your voodoo doll.
There's a bit of delay on there as well. Here's the three vocals together.
Sticks, pins, and your voodoo doll. Sticks, pins, and your voodoo doll.
Which with the music sounds like this.
Sticks, pins, and your voodoo doll. Sticks, pins, and your voodoo doll. Sticks, pins, and your voodoo doll. Find room for another hole.
And we've also got some other harmonies in the bridges here. Here's Joe doing a harmony with me in the bridge melody.
So when the worst thing I could ever do, the next time someone does to you.
Here's what it sounds like. This is the second bridge.
But in a worst case scenario, you get what you can. It either looks like a woman or it looks like a man. What happened made me sink so low? Stick, stick.
Stickity stick. And we've also got some calmer harmonies for the verse as well.
Nothing will shake them, whatever I do. I fashion the likeness, the essence of you. You're looking so much better since I did your hair and made you longer. It takes a little practice, you can do it at home.
So there's lots of different vocal treatments here going on throughout the track, and it all helps to differentiate each different section and hopefully kind of keep the interest bubbling away throughout the song and create some different textures. And we also got the lads in on the last chorus as well to sing our invented word esticamina, which you can hear. Which goes along with the stick pins lyric in the chorus, so that kind of adds a little bit of energy at the end there. So there we are. It's not just a question of just doing, you know, one single vocal. It's all about a bit of double tracking, a bit of harmony, some different sounds coming in, and different voices as well, and then some group stuff too. So there's a bit of everything in there. So with all the vocals and the instrumentation done, the only thing that was annoying me about the track was the intro. I still didn't have an intro. And what we used to do when we played this song live was that we used to play a heavy version of what happens in the middle eight of the song, which is this here.
Well, I'm sorry for misunderstanding you. There was no need to retaliate. I did nothing to you. But I'm going to, if you make a point of it.
We used to play that quite heavy with the guitars, and it used to end up with the do 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 intro. So what we thought might be a laugh would be to take that tune and just play it on something ridiculous. And in the end, our good friend and piano genius Simon Gwilliam came in and played a super cheesy lounge version on the piano, which sounds like this. wanted to just create the atmosphere of some kind of lounge bar, so we went to a couple of sound effects websites and bought some sound effects and created the sound of a bar and restaurant in the background like this. So when the piano's in amongst all that. Which hopefully leads nicely into the song. So that's what we've decided to use. So we've got everything recorded now. It's time to start having a look at the mix. Welcome back to our rock masterclass, and this edition will be dealing with mixing. We've got everything recorded now. We've got to start the mixing process, and we're going to talk about how to set your monitoring up and make sure that your mixing environment is not hindering you by sounding weird. And I'm going to show you how I organise my mixes within Pro Tools, so I've got a bit more control over what's going on. And then we're going to hoe into the drum sound and have a look at the bass and just get the foundation stone of our mix up and running before we go on to have a look at the guitars and vocals and all the little bits of icing on the cake. So let's get on with that now. Before we start mixing, we've got to make sure that our monitoring is as good as it can be, because obviously we're basing all of our decisions on what we're hearing out of the speakers, and if they're giving us wrong information, if they're sounding too bassy, then we're not going to add enough bass into the tracks, and when you take them outside they're going to sound not bassy enough. Or if these are too toppy, conversely, when you take them outside the studio, your mixes will be too dull. And we have to try and get the best kind of flattest response we can get. And there's a few rules that apply universally, which we might as well talk about. And the first thing is that it's best to have your monitors and your head as three corners of an equilateral triangle. That way you're getting a good stereo image. Although it's lovely to get right in between them, and often I'm here programming and you get this super wide image going on, and it's very enjoyable, but actually until you just sit back here and have a listen, you don't get the proper picture. So it's best if your work position can be at exactly the right point. And I've got two sets of speakers here. I've got my KRKs, which I love. They're passive speakers, they're powered by a little quad amplifier, which is pretty good, could be better. And I've also got a KRK subwoofer, a 10-inch subwoofer down there, which takes care of... I've got the crossover set quite high. That's the crossover point is where it stops low frequencies going to the two speakers up here, and it takes them down to the woofer where they happen. And I've got my crossover set probably at about 100 Hertz, which some people might say is too high, but I think one of the things you have to do is you have to do your setup according to the room that you're in, and sometimes the only thing you can really do is play a CD that you love and adjust your monitoring until it sounds exactly the way you love it. So that's what I've done in here, and then that gives me a very loud, exciting, big sound, and that's great. But you have to know also that your mixes are going to work on a small set of speakers, on a small little domestic hi-fi. So I've got this little Denon thing down here which has got an auxiliary input in it and little Denon speakers, and so I use those as to flip across. When I get my sounds the way they need to be, it's sometimes nice to turn everything down, put it on small speakers. You can actually do your balancing at quite low volumes, and you get a good realistic kind of balance up there, and it sounds great when you turn it up loud again. There's all sorts of monitors you can buy, and they vary in price hugely. You can spend thousands of pounds on a monitoring system, and you can also get a pretty good pair of active monitors for perhaps £300 or £400. But whatever speakers you've got, you can always do something to help them sound a bit better by isolating them from the environment as much as you can. Mine are mounted on breed block towers, so it's nice and heavy. There's actually under here there's a layer of neoprene rubber. I've got another paving slab on there, and I've also got these china cones which the speakers sit on, and they actually just because they vibrate at a very high frequency that's out of the range of the human ear. It actually helps to dissipate some of the low frequency energy from the speaker cabs themselves, and it helps them sound a little more natural. It helps the stereo imaging a little bit as well, and I think they really do make a nice difference. And all this helps to create a nice, stable, balanced image. And once you've got that in place, it's just down to you and your ears, and you've just got to go through the process, and if you can, keep making little CDs, take it out to the car, put it on the radio in the kitchen, just listen in all sorts of different places, and just, you know, take note of what it's sounding like. You may think, well, actually that guitar bit needs to come up in the second verse, the vocal sounds a bit like this, can't really hear the bass. Just keep doing it like a chef tasting his soup. Just keep taking it out and having a listen and make your judgments, because there's no right or wrong way to do this. Everyone eventually finds their own way, but there are a few rules that you can follow to help make it a bit easier, and that's what we're going to go over today. The first thing you have to do before you tackle your session is to make sure you've got control over your room and your monitoring environment. You've already sorted your monitors out. They're as good as they can be. The next thing to do is just to make sure that the room itself sounds good and it's not throwing you any kind of curveballs. It's not too bouncy, too echoey or cave-like, and there's no kind of bottom end boominess going on. There's a lot you can do to help you with that, and again you can spend thousands of pounds sonically flattening a room, but most of the time it's good enough just to kind of fill it up with a few soft furnishings and cupboards, and you know, as chunky a sofa as you can get in the back, perhaps the odd rug or two or a carpet. And you can see I've got these big chunky foam shapes here. They're made of Melotech, which is a high density foam that's really good at absorbing upper, mid and high frequency signals, and it stops the sound splashing around the room and helps create a nice focused stereo image. So once you've got your room under control, you need to have a good monitor controller, and as luck would have it today, my Mackie big knob controller is not here, and so at the moment I'm just using this Mackie desk. But the big knob is the ideal thing, because we're not using a desk to mix, we're doing all of our mixing within Pro Tools, so we don't need a mixer. And the big knob is precisely for that kind of situation, because all it does is it gives you 3 or 4 stereo inputs, your workstation, perhaps a CD, record player, whatever. And it also gives you the choice to switch between 3 or 4 sets of monitors. In this case it would be the KLKs and the small Denons as well. And you can adjust the volume trims on all of those, so the switching is effortless, and you don't have to constantly jiggle with volumes. You can just flick between monitors quite happily. And also the big knob is great because it allows you to send headphone feeds and talk back around your studio too. So if you're working just purely inside the box, something like that is essential, because you just need to have a nice control of your level. It's nice to know normally where you are. I've got a little mark set on there, which is my reference point of right, when it's here it should sound pretty happening. And I know if I'm turning it up much louder than that, I'm trying to kind of get it to sound more exciting just by turning it up, and that's normally a bad sign. You need to have it at a nice, you know, a satisfying level. It's nice to feel a little bit of bass, but it should sound exciting, you know, at reasonably low levels. And in fact, as the mix goes on, it should sound better and better at quieter and quieter levels, and by the time you're actually printing your final mix, you probably want to be listening to it on small speakers very quietly, and it should sound great. So that's something to watch out for. And once you've got all that in place, you're actually ready to have a look at your session, and that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to mix our tune down now, and you know, delaying once again before you start. It pays to get organised. I mean, look at all this. Look at all this stuff we've recorded. All those guitars, all those vocals, and the one thing I don't want to be doing is endlessly scrolling around the session like this trying to find something. So, if you can, and if your software allows you to, I think it's a really good idea to set up some dedicated views and some dedicated sub-master channels. I'll show you what I mean. In Tools, we can set up views like this. For example, if I go to the vocals, it's going to turn off everything apart from the vocals. You know, and that applies to bass and the guitars. There's huge amounts of guitars and drums as well. And at least that saves a little bit of time when you're navigating your way around the track, because you want to be just working quickly and intuitively once you get going. And then the second thing to do that I think is best to do straight away before you get going is to make a set of submasters and masters. And if you look here, you can see that I've got kit master, bass master, guitar master, and LV, master lead vocal master, and then one master. And this gives me a very quick way of switching off and on whole chunks of the track. And all I've done is, with the bass for example, I've actually ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4 channels of bass. On the mixer, I've created in my bussing, I've created a stereo bus called bass, and I've routed these channels to bus the bass bus, and I've set up a stereo auxiliary channel, and I've set the input to the bass bus there, which means all the basses come out of that one track at the end there. So there's all these different types of bass sound. But they all come out here. So I've done that for the vocals as well. There's the LV sub there, and the drums, and the intro elements, and the guitars. And in fact, even with the guitars, where there's particular types of guitar, like there's one sound here, I've created a little submaster just for that, because that sound is made up of 4 channels of audio. So that's a quick way of making adjustments and volume rise to all of those channels in one go. So sub channels are a really quick and easy way of getting on top of the mix, because then when you've got your master, I don't know why that little sub's showing. Right, so there's a few things there that aren't coming out of their masters yet. Some of these backing vocals, let's have a look. That's 11. Right, so I'm going to sort this out, and I'm going to come back to you when I've got all these masters sorted on here, and we're going to talk about this. Well, I've taken those bits of straggly audio that were poking out of the mix and folded them nicely into their own little subgroups. And so now I've got control over the main elements of the mix, and this is where something like this comes into its own. This is a Mackie Huey, which is a kind of hardware controller for software that can be that talks to several different applications. I'm using Pro Tools here, and it's great because it actually gives you real faders to balance the sound up with, and it actually makes a lot of difference. So I can take the elements of my mix and very quickly just knock up a quick balance like that instinctively, and more often than not it's not going to be far wrong, really. So you're already there, I can hear everything that's going on. And the great thing about this scenario of having different submasters here is that I've created a master output here which shows me the master outputs of Pro Tools. And if I've got 50 or 60 tracks of audio all playing stuff, you know, the chances are that you turn things up, and eventually you'll start overloading the master output, which you don't want to do at all. And of course it's very difficult sometimes when you've got a load of stuff going on to think, oh, okay, I've got to turn everything down a little bit, and sometimes that's a real hassle because you've got, you know, it sends off to effects and you've got groups of channels grouped together, and often it's very difficult just to globally turn things down. Having stuff in submasters makes it a lot easier because, you know, for my guitars, I mean, I've got all these different subs here, all these different channels, and yet if I just want to bring the guitars down a little bit, all I've got to do is just do that and it's done. So you can very quickly just pull all the masters of the mix down and make sure you're not overloading. You also have to keep an eye on the masters as well because you don't want to be sending too much to them. But this way it keeps things very manageable and straightforward. So we've got a scenario here where everything's in. It's okay, not sounding bad, but I want to get in now and get involved with the drum kit and the bass, and just to get the rhythm section sounding really punchy. And there's a rough balance there, you know, the guitars are roughly where they want to be, the vocals are roughly where they want to be, so I've got a kind of good reference situation. So I'm going to have a look at the drum kit in detail now. So I'm going to have a look at the drums, and straight away there's a few things I want to do. With the tom channels, for example, I've actually turned them off except when they're playing, because I want to have the toms nice and loud, and I don't want the spill from those mics interrupting the rest of the drum sound. So I've edited them like this, what you can see there. They just pop on every now and again when they play something, and I've just put a little crossfade at the starts and ends of those regions. So that's going to immediately help with my drum sound. I don't always do that, sometimes actually the sound of the toms shaken away can be part of the sound, but on this occasion I've decided to turn it off. And here is our basic drum sound. Sounds nice, but it needs to be a lot punchier at a lower volume. So there's a few things we can do about that, and I'll show you some of them here. Let's go to Masters and switch off everything. Go back to our kit. So our snare sound is built up of 3 mics. We have the Neumann mic, which gives this sound here. It's got a nice lot of body to it. We also have 57 on top, which has got a lot more top end on there. And we've also got underneath the snare as well. And together it sounds like this. Well, I'm going to show you a little trick for getting rid of hi-hat spill on your snare mic. It's not too bad in the verse, but when it gets to the chorus, this is the Neumann. When Damien opens up his hi-hat like that, there's too much of it there. So I'm going to show you a quick way of getting rid of that. You can use a gate if you want, or you can manually, if you're insane enough, draw a volume curve all the way through the track. I've found a way of doing it that I think sounds quite natural. This is the original Neumann track here, and what I've done is I've duplicated it exactly on top of itself, and I've routed both of these channels to one output here. So now we're just going to listen to the Neumann mic. Now I've created an absolute duplicate of it here, and I'll show you what these plugins are doing in a second. So the first thing that happens is it just gets twice as loud. So that's the two channels playing simultaneously. Now, what happens if I put a trim plugin on here and put one of these out of phase? It will disappear completely. Gone. Okay. This is two tracks, identical, played, but one of them's out of phase. So there's a technique we can use here. If we take one of the tracks and compress it to hell, this is uncompressed. So the snare's coming through nice and strong. If I compress it, it flattens the snare right off. It doesn't really allow its voice. So all you can hear really is all that hi-hat. Now if I put this out of phase and play it back with my original track, the out of phase hi-hats will cancel each other out and the unaffected snare will poke through, like this. If I turn one of the channels off, now that's quite extreme there, and you can alter the extent of that by changing the threshold on the compressor. But I think that's quite a natural way of achieving a gating kind of effect, because I really want to take this sound of that Neumann mic and really compress it heavily to give the drum some real punch. So if I now mix that back in with the other drum channels, balancing those mics together, and there's a little bit of EQ going on here on the bottom of the snare mic. I've actually pushed some of the bottom end out some of the middle. Right. So and now I'm going to show you how I'm going to recombine some of these ingredients to make the whole drum sound. Right. I've managed to get rid of some of that unwanted hi-hat from out of the snare, and what I'm left with is a nice basic drum sound. That's pretty. I mean, the kick drum is made up of our 3 mics. I'll remind you what they were. Let's have a look here. This was the 57 on the skin of the kick drum. This was the main kick drum mic, the Sennheiser. That's giving the main kind of chesty thump. And we also had the NS10 driver buried inside. I don't know if you can pick that up, but that's very sub-bass frequencies there. So we can balance those up. You see the 57 on the beta gives it the presence. It's a much softer sound without it. There it is. So it gives you a real kind of modern, quite hefty kick drum sound. So at the moment, all the mics are being bussed off to a bus here, and one of the things you can do is you can actually multiply your buses and treat them differently. So what I've done is I've also got the same drum sound going off to another bus, but this one is really heavily compressed. Actually, this bus here, I'm just actually sending, let's have a look, compressed kit. This is snare comp. So I'm just sending the snare drum mic to this bus here, putting a big compressor on it. Again, we can do that because the hi-hat's been kind of eradicated in there. And of course we're compressing, so it's still coming through quite a lot. But let me show you what happens when we take our normal drum sound like this. Let's go for the verse. Yeah. And if I add in the compressed snare, make the snare, I'll take it out again, softer, and back in again. Now, here's another snare bus, kit bus. And over this one I've got an analog channel probably, which is going to be compressing things a bit, boosting a bit of bottom end and a bit of top end. This is a kind of analog tape simulator. This is again the straightforward sound of the kit. And when I switch the plug-in on, it really gives me some wallop down at the bottom end. So I've got 3 different drum kit elements there, and I'm going to combine them all now, and it sounds like this. Now, I've got some ambient tracks here. Quite a lot of spill on them, so I'm going to create some ambience, and I'm going to do that by using a delay. I'm going to send some of the drums off to a delay, and that's going to be a kind of slap back kind of delay. I'll show you what that sounds like. Now obviously I don't want it that loud, so I'm gonna have it very subtly in there. And when that's quite quiet, it just adds a little bit of space and width to the drums. But I'll turn it up a little bit just for now, so you can hear what's going on. So it's like a very quick echo. Now I'm going to put that through a reverb unit, about kind of half and half. With a short ambience on it. And then all of that is going to go through another analog channel, which is going to crunch it up a bit. And I'm now going to blend that back into the drum sound. And that creates quite a natural space around the kit if I turn it off. That's without it. And that's with it. So it gives a sense of air around the kit. So, let's have a look at how that's sounding with everything else. Let's see what it's like in the chorus. Good. What I've done also is that in the sections after each chorus with the little drum fills here, I've actually turned up the left and right ambience just on where those fills are, so it sounds a lot more lively. It just creeps in for those bits. If they were in all the time, the sound is just too messy, and so I've just got it jumping in at those points, but psychologically you don't notice that. And because I've got the toms edited without any spill, I can turn them up as loud as I want. So the drums are sounding pretty good and exciting now. That's a good basic drum sound. I'm pretty pleased with that. So I think the thing to do is to kind of balance in everything else now. I'll have a look at the bass, and so we've got the bottom end kind of well established, and that will give us our foundation to build everything else on. So we'll have a look at the bass, and maybe we'll come back and tweak the drums a little bit later on. And actually, I'll show you one more thing while we're here. What I did earlier was I fed the snare drum out to some effects pedals and got a sound a bit like this. That's the snare drum, believe it or not. And this. So I just wanted to get a little bit more crunch on the snare drum, so actually if we introduce these sounds into the mix as well. So let's just solo the okay without them. With them, there's a little bit more body. And again, it all helps create a nice kind of thick and unique drum sound. So don't be afraid to send things out to guitar pedals and things, mangle them up, record them back in, and mix it up with your sound. So we're going to have a quick look at the bass guitar now. We've got a few different sounds going on. Remember, we had a really filthy, disgusting sound. A little bit of a bonus tom there. And then we had, for the verses, we had this kind of filtered sound. And I've just put a little filter on there to take out some of the top end noise. And we've also got a quite clean bass sound actually. I went back and found an old take, and I discovered that it was probably better in the choruses with all those distorted guitars going on to actually use a slightly cleaner sound like this. So there's three different bass sounds here, and they're all bussed to this bass master down here, and I've got a little compression and a little bit of EQ going on there. What have we got? Just a bit of a boost down at the bottom end, nothing much really. A bit of compression. You can see here, just keeping a bit of a lid on it, and then I've used lo-fi just to add a little bit of distortion in there, which just fattens the sound out a little bit. Just adds another little layer of fatness there, and that's all sounding pretty good to me. I just need to have a listen with the drums. Best to filter off a little bit of the low end there. Let's just use quite a sharp curve. You can see the cut off here. We don't want much below, let's say 50 or 60 hertz there. Get some rumble out of it. See how that jumps between sounds. They're all pretty much there or thereabouts really. Just it's good to just keep a little bit of a hard compression on bass just to try and hold it in its place, and just watch the very low frequencies. It's usually a good idea to filter out everything below 50 or 60 hertz, and then use a little bit of distortion or overdrive to kind of bring the warmth and the kind of low, I suppose low mid higher bass frequencies out a little bit more. That will have the effect of making the bass notes quite audible, even if you're listening on small speakers. If it's all too subby and boomy, you'll hear it great on big speakers, but the minute it's on the radio, it will just disappear because those speakers aren't going to reproduce those frequencies. So you need to add in a little bit of distortion just to make it work more quietly. So that's essentially our rhythm section taken care of. Hello and welcome back to the final instalment of our Rock Masterclass, where we will be doing the final stage of the mixing on our heavy track we've been working on for the last few months. This month we will be dealing with organising the big mass of guitars that we recorded and getting involved with EQ and panning and position to try and create a bit of space in our mix for the vocals to then sit in the middle. We'll be looking at all the different types of vocal treatment that we can do. Then we'll be looking at doing some rides in the mix using the controller here to kind of write in some automation where it's needed. We'll then look at any kind of master effects that we might need to do over the whole mix or even over some of the subgroups. And we'll also have a quick look at how actually to record your final mix once you've done it, whether you're going to bounce straight out of your sequencer, whether you might want to record to another sequencer to preserve quality, we'll get into that later, or you may want to even record to a tape machine. You may even want to take your whole Pro Tools setup to the mastering engineer and play it straight out. But anyway, here we go. Here's our first guitar part, and what I've done first of all is I've done a bit of subgrouping and busing to make it easier. This guitar part here that we can listen to is that's made up of a pair of guitars playing, and there's a mixture of amp and DI signal in there. So I've got all that coming out of one fader here. And again, I have another pair of those down here that kick in for different parts of the song and for the chorus. Which are a little bit more abrasive. And listening to it along with the drums and bass.
All around the discos and the cocktail bars.
And a bit of the vocal there as well. I'm wanting to do a bit of EQ on those and bring out the mids a hell of a lot more. And one of my favourite ways of doing that with guitar is using these URS EQs here, which are based on an old API EQ, the 55B, I think it is, if I remember rightly. But they're ever so good at bringing out the mids. This is flat. All those mid ranges of the guitar immediately just jump out of the speaker. There, and I've got another one down here on these boys here. There's this one. So it's a huge difference there, but you've got to watch out because even though there's fairly small boosts around here, like 3.5 dB, 2.5 dB here, when that happens over a few bands, that actually adds up to kind of 10 or 12 dB in boost. So you have to make sure that you bring your input down and your output down as well to stop any internal clipping going on, because that happens really easily with these EQs, and which is not a fault of them at all. It's just something you've got to watch out for. But if you're not careful, you'll end up with a very unpleasant kind of fizzing sound going on, which you don't want. So with these guitars, both with their EQ, we've got a much more lively sound happening. So that's just a basic EQ treatment on those two sort of core guitars for the song. And I haven't put any compression or anything on them yet. I'm just going to see how they, I'd rather leave them as open as I can for as long as possible, so we'll maybe come back to that. And let's have a look at a couple of the other flavours of guitar we've got going on. We've put these chimey guitars in verse 2. Okay, let's have a look at this guitar part here, second verse. But anyway, what I've done with that is I've used, first of all, a Sans amp to give it a little bit more grip. So I'll play it and then bring the Sans amp in so you can hear what it's doing. I'm making the sound a little bit thinner and a bit more crunchy there. And then I'm using a delay, just to kind of make the sound a little bit more spatially exciting. It's quite subtle really. I don't know whether you're going to pick that up without being sat right here between the speakers. But that's now a bit more sparkly, a bit more happening on the left and the right. Leaves room for the vocal to happen in the middle. Again, any EQ that's happened has happened with the Sans amp plug-in there. Now, we've also got a few other little pieces here. These are the big chorus guitars, and once again, I've used my favourites. And I'll probably move on to something else in a couple of weeks' time. It's funny, you just get stuck into things for a while, and at the moment these are the ones that are doing it for me. Again, it's a pair of guitars. They're both pretty chunky. There's a lot of bottom end on them. So I want to kind of take some of the bottom end out and boost some in the middle around 1k here and around 500k here. So I'll play this and then I'll bring the EQs in halfway through. So you can hear the mids come through a lot stronger. Now actually, you know, on its own, it sounds lovely without the EQs because it's a whole big, deep, rich sound. But in the mix it's too much, so I've thinned it out, and I've also taken some of the very top off as well because I've got another guitar, this one, with a load of top end energy on it. So those guitars are sounding pretty good now. What else have we got? We've got the middle guitars here, and where it breaks down nice and quietly for the middle eight. So let's have a look what we've got. Right, here we are. This is just the main rhythm guitar that's going through the middle, which is pretty straightforward. So the first thing I've done is thin it out with some EQ. I just want it to be a little tinny guitar. And I've actually put it over to one side, and I want to give it the impression of being back in the room a little bit, so I'm using a reverb here with a kind of small ambience setting on it. So it sounds like this. So that sounds more like there's a little amp sat on the floor of the room over there somewhere now. It's actually exists in space a bit more. And that should contrast nicely with these guitars over here. Let's have a look. Once again, I've used EQ and reverb on this one. Here it is dry. Bit of space, bit of EQ. So I've got also this pair of guitars here. Very nice and warm, kind of pan center at the moment. This one here is panned over to the right. And that one's panned over to the left. So we've got a nice rich picture there for the middle eight. There's a part here that happens at the end. Which I think I can take away from this track here, because I think it will benefit from the same treatment that those second verse guitars have got. So let's put it up onto one of those that's panned over to the left, so it sounds like this. That's much better. So. Actually, I don't think I do want it on the left. That's where that one is, so I'm going to put it on the right. Right, okay, that's good, I like that. And that really is it for the moment. There's a few other little kind of bits and pieces going on. What have we got here? Just a little colour over the intro there. Oh, that's a nice plug-in actually. show you what I've done with that, because there's a little plugin called Telray here which I really like, and Phoenix. This is the sound that happens over the intro. Again, it's a little bit of low frequency information on now I don't really want, so go to the EQ there. You can see I've just taken out all but the kind of upper mids really. It doesn't need any of that bottom end information because it's happening over a big wedge of guitars, so we've EQ'd that out. Put a bit of compression on it. And then I've used Telray to give it a bit of slappy delay. And then use the Phoenix to fatten it up a little bit. So these are tape simulation plugins, and they just kind of bring things out a little bit. It's difficult to describe exactly what they do, but I like it. So that then sits on top of those big wedgy guitars and colours the intro. So all these guitars, the buses for those first two pairs and all the ones we've subsequently dealt with have all been bussed to Guitar Master down here, and they will appear now on our Masters page here. So I've got fader control over all the guitars, and I've also got the opportunity to globally EQ or compress them as I see fit further on down the line. So now we're going to have a look at the vocals, and if you remember, we've got the main vocal. I've done a low octave vocal on the verses and a double tracker in the choruses. Joe has done a low harmony in the choruses and a high harmony in some of the verses, and there's some other little bits and pieces here in the verses as well. And we've got a shouty mob to have a look at. So somehow we've got to make this make the sounds work for all the different sections, and find different places for all the vocals so that when they come in you notice them, but they never get in the way of the main vocal. The main vocal has to be the focal point of the song all the way through, and a lot of that we can achieve with fader rides later, but what I'll do now is show you some of the different treatments I've got on, just so you can see the different types of place where you can put vocals in a mix. As soon as I've done the main vocals, I put some plugins straight on, and I'll just remind you what they were. First up, I used a multi-band compressor, and I've got into the habit of using this, and haven't got out of it yet, but when I do my vocals, I often like to be really close to the microphone, and it gives a nice kind of intimate sound, but you can, because of the proximity effect, you can end up with a little bit of woolliness and sort of bassiness in the voice that you don't want. And I find quite a nice way of getting rid of that is to sit on it with a multi-band compressor. And here's the vocal on its own. Let's pick a verse.
And the cocktail bars, most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
I'm just selecting that frequency just to squash it a little bit.
And the cocktail bars, most of them don't want to be.
And I'm adding quite a lot of top end in this register here. Of course, a lot of that is S-y sounds, but there's also a kind of air that goes through the vocal, and I like adding that in, but I don't like all the S's. So I end up with a sound that's like this.
Bars, most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
Next thing I do is use this just this is a kind of quick compressor I put on. But actually sounding pretty good. It's called RVox. It's a waves compressor, and I like it because it's just dead simple. You just it's just how much. You just pull that fader down and it compresses.
Goes and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
So I've now got a really bright vocal that's kind of compressed and sat there, but it's way too essy. So I use a waves de-esser just to sit on the top end.
Goes and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far. You always see the faces that you don't want to see, and always...
Sometimes it's difficult to know how much de-essing you should do, and I always found that a good way to kind of recalibrate my ears, and if I was just, sometimes I'd find that I was over de-essing it, so you'd end up with a kind of dull or lispy vocal. Put on another track, another CD or something, have a listen, just listen to what the top end of the drum kit is doing, the cymbals, and listen to the vocal and listen to the sibilants, and just work out what the balance is like there, and then put your track back on, and you should be able to go, oh okay, maybe I can have a bit more essy or a bit less essy. Just listen to something else if you get bogged down with it. But you know, it should end up just sounding pretty natural to you.
And the discos and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far. You always see the faces that you don't want to see, and always in the places where you don't want to be. But it's no use leaving traces if you're picking them off.
So there we go, and I want to make sure I can hear that vocal. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. Okay, so that's good. I can hear that sat on top of the track. I can just do fine adjustments later, but for now that's alright. I'm going to have a look at the low vocal that I did, that I've bussed out to, I've put all the backing vocals out of their own subgroup called BVs sub here. So here is that low vocal, and I've got quite a few treatments happening on that. Again, I've used the same multi-band compression setup because I was doing low pitch vocals quite close to the mic. It sounds like this.
Discos and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are.
That's a bit woolly, so I've used this to brighten it up.
And the discos and the cocktail bars.
Added the same compression here, and also then brought in the de-esser to control the S's.
And the discos and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
So that's good. That sits in with the other vocal like this.
Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
But what I've done also with the low one is that I've decided to put a delay on it, and I've used a stereo delay here. And the idea is to have a side-to-side effect going on.
Discos and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
So what I've done with this really effectively is I've, because the mix on the right hand side is at minimum, that's just the same, and I've put a 23 millisecond delay on the right with the mix at 100%. So what's happening is that there's literally just a 23 millisecond time difference between when you hear it on the left and the right, and it immediately makes the sound really wide. Like that.
Discos and the cocktail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
So that's put the low vocal right out to the edges, and I'm going to leave the high vocal sat right in the middle, so it sounds like this.
or tail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
Which is nice. Sits in the track like this.
Tail bars. Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far. You always see the faces that you don't want to see.
So that's a nice vibe happening there. And then I've noticed that Joe's creeping in here with some harmonies in that verse as well. And I think he's given himself a naughty auto-tune here. So I'll leave that on for the time being until I consult him about it. And what have we got? Bit of EQ, and we're just taking off bottom end under about 300 Hertz. The old RVox compressor, quick and easy, and I would guess a de-esser, that's right, because I know Joe did his vocals himself. But so,
Don't want to see places where you don't want to be, but it's no use leaving traces if you're picking them off like me.
so that's going to help colour the verses a bit.
Places that you don't want to see, and always in the places where you don't want to be, but it's no use leaving traces if you're picking them off like me.
And again, I'm just going to pan that one slightly over to the right. And there's a vocal coming in the bridge here, which is I'm going to pan across to the left. And then this one we've done a little bit more on. It's similar basic treatments, multi-band, a compressor and a de-esser, but I've got a Telray delay on the end of this one. This is it, just without that delay.
So when the worst thing I could ever do, the next time someone does to you.
And I've put this delay on it because I want the bridges to come across as being a little bit louder and lairier. So
when the worst thing I could ever do, the next time someone does to you.
So this is what that sounds like in the mix.
So when the worst thing I could ever do, the next time someone does to you.
Sounds nice and loud. I'll bring the backing vocals back down into balance a little bit. I'm losing my main vocal a bit there, but again I can give it a push later on. So that's nice. We've got backing vocals. We've got a wide one, a middle one. We've had one coming on the left, one coming on the right, and now we get to the chorus. And I've double tracked myself here, and I've given myself a similar delay to what was on the low vocal, and that sounds like this.
Doll, stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your voodoo doll. Doll, stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your voodoo doll.
And there's a low harmony as well that Joe's done on here, and I've given this entirely a different treatment. This has got, let's have a look, there's a pitch blender on here, I'll show you in a minute. De-esser as usual, and then to start off with it's just got a bit of EQ, all the bottom end taken off, a bit of a presence peak around 8K just to give it a bit of top.
Pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your voodoo doll.
Yeah, bit of de-esser there. But I've used a pitch blender here, which is a Soundtoys plugin that kind of mimics what the old hardware Eventide H3000 used to do, which is a wicked old gadget that did kind of micro pitch shift increments on the left and the right, and had delays and filters all built in. And this is a plugin that emulates that. It's not the only one that does, it's one of my favourite ones. And I'm using a fairly kind of wide, pitchy, long delay setting. It sounds like this.
Stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your voodoo doll.
Again, again, because both of my, my main vocal centre, my double track is wide but it's dry, so this is wide and wet now. So the effect is like this. I'll turn it up a bit so we can hear. Put it back to where it belongs, and that the delay helps just give a bit of extra size to the chorus, I think. So that's pretty much it. We've got treatments for the verse, the bridge, and the chorus that stays set through the song. And then the other thing I've got in here are the big mobs, the Larry boys at the end. And I think they're just best left as they are, really. So that's a good basic sound from the vocals. And all we've got to do now is go through and do some rides and make sure we can hear everything clearly at every point of the song. So we'll dive in and do a bit of that. So we're going to do some rides on the mix, and we've already done a couple on the drums. If you remember, in the little stoppy, starty fills at the end of each chorus, we brought the ambient mics up in the gaps to give the impression of a great big airy drum sound. Airy, not hairy, dropping my age, airy. And of course we've got our controller here, so we can see these rides reflected there. So that's some rides that we've done on the drums. Now there's one I've got to do. There's a feedback piece of guitar from Total Mayhem that comes in at the end of the track here. Very carefully crafted piece of music there that I want to make sure sits in the mix just right. I want it to be there because it just creates a nice sense of wonkiness and chaos, and but also I don't want it to take over, so we'll just find a good spot for it first of all. Sure, so if we can put the track into record, so I can record the fader moves. Oh, beg your pardon. So there's some sort of instinctive moves there. I think the whole thing generally was a bit loud, so once I've got that automation written in, it's easy just to trim it down a little bit. Just a little bit more. Okay, so that's not bad. It's sort of hovering. I'll just take that track off of unarm it. So if I move the fader, it doesn't record it. And that's the main thing. Is the vocal. And been through here already, and you can see if I just enlarge the track nice and big. We've got some rides happening here, you know. Let's have a listen to actually what that vocal's doing. So.
No use leaving traces if you're picking them off like me. So when the worst thing I could ever do, the next time someone does to you, stick pins in your voodoo doll.
See, it sounds all nice and natural, but you notice there's a bit of a peak there.
Next time someone does to you, stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pins in your
Doesn't sound like there's volume rides going on, but you can just hear those words nice and clearly. So I've gone through the song and just set a level for each section so the vocals coming through nice and clear.
when nothing will shake them, whatever I do.
Now a big hoik up again for the bridge.
Like your own, but in a worst case scenario, you get what you can. It either looks like a woman or it looks like a man. What happened made me sink so low?
See where all the music stops there, the vocal can actually get quieter as the sound all dies. The vocal can die with it, and that will just give the impression of being natural.
What happened made me sink so low? Stick pins in your voodoo doll.
And so there's some rides. I've also done a couple of little bits and pieces on the bass where there's a bonkers bass sound here. Again, that's the stop leading into the chorus, and a fade helps create a more natural effect.
Stick pins in your voodoo doll. Stick pin.
Of course, the advantage of having Pro Tools is that where once upon a time, you know, we used to have a limited number of tracks on a tape, so you'd have to put all sorts of different things on the same track, and you'd have to do lots of volume rides. I've virtually got a track for everything, you know, and all these different guitar sounds have all gone on their own different tracks. So pretty much once the level's right for those, you know, it's just set for the song. So it's only a few key things really you need to do, like the vocal and again any bits that need to kind of creep in and out, like that feedback guitar. And then you're in a situation where you should be able to play the mix down and perhaps look at putting some effects on your main buses. For example, with the drums. Now my bus is overloading here a little bit, so I might have to go back and just have a look at that and just pull the drum tracks down a little bit, just so it's not overloading. But I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything too bad with that. Might let that one go. You know, you can't keep worrying too much about these things. I mean, you'd hear it if it started really squaring off. You'd hear it. It's not too bad now. And these peak at the earliest available opportunity. So I've got an SSL style compressor over the drums here, which if I set the meter to compression here, you'd probably just see a couple of dBs of reduction here and there. Just going to bring the release time down a little bit. Just play around. Longer attack time to let some transients come through. And now you've got all your submasters prepared, there's no reason why you can't, you know, if you kind of go away from the mix, perhaps put it back up the next day, have a listen, you might think, well, actually it's pretty good, maybe all the guitars just need brightening a little bit. Of course, you can just bring in an EQ over your guitar sub and try that out, you know.
Voodoo doll, stick pins in your voodoo doll, stick pins in your voodoo doll, stick pins in your voodoo doll, find room for another hole.
It always sounds immediately quite gratifying when you do things like that, going and pile on a bunch of stuff and think, oh, that sounds good, but you know, just remember that you've spent a long time balancing the thing up, and what you do in one area has a knock-on effect in another. So I could bring out a lot more mids on the guitar, but all of a sudden it might make the drums, in comparison, sound a little bit dull. So watch what you're doing, and always just keep going back and checking what you had before. And I mean, I've just been trying out putting a bit of master EQ and some treatments over the main mix bus, but actually I'm quite happy with how it is. But there's no reason why, again, you shouldn't just pull out a bit of compression and just see what kind of effect it has. I mean, I just didn't find it was helping at this point. I've got a bit of compression over the drums and everything's pretty much in its own place. So again, and if anything is slightly worrying you, you can always just do the odd little volume ride on any of these subs. And ultimately, your mix should now be coming out of here, your master bus. So now you've just got to decide how you're going to capture your final mix. If we were in super posh world, what we'd do now is we'd plug into a half-inch tape machine perhaps and record to half-inch. I like recording to half-inch tape with Dolby SR. I think it has a nice effect on the sound, but you know, it's really expensive because you've either got to get hold of a machine or you've got to go somewhere where you've got one. You've got to buy the tape, which isn't cheap. And also, when you go to, if you're going to go and master your track, that means you've also got to make sure they've got an equivalent tape machine and a Dolby SR up there, and you've got to take your line-up tapes and get it all done. So it's quite a business. More often than not, we'll just bounce digitally out of our mix. And we're working at 48 kilohertz sample rate, and if this is going to be, if we're going to master this ourselves, we've got to get this down to 44.1 to go on a CD. And unfortunately, it's quite a destructive process. Digitally, what's the word I'm looking for? Was it? Downsampling. There's another one. But anyway, digitally processing the signal from 48 to 41. If you actually then listen A/B, the two, you can hear quite a marked difference between the two. The 44.1 image will not have as much depth and not quite as much clarity. But you don't even really notice that if you're A/Bing them. So but sometimes, of course, you've got no choice, and I've had to do that, and it's fine. If you've got to do it, you've got to do it, you know. But there are other ways around it. So in Pro Tools, the first thing you can do here is you can take your master output, and our way of doing it is we go bounce to disk, and we'll take the output source, which is the output what's being routed to Prism 1 and 2. Select the file type, stereo interleaved. We go from 24 to 16-bit. Again, it's another conversion process, and we go from 48 to 44.1. And it's asking about conversion quality, and of course you pick the best one, tweak head. So that'll do a pretty good job, and at least then you can take your mix, bang it onto a CD, stick it on in the car or elsewhere, and have a listen to it, and that's fine. But what might be better is to bring in another recording system, like if you've got perhaps another Pro Tools rig or another computer with Logic on it, another interface, and actually play out of your best interface at 48. In my case, we're playing out of the Prism at the moment, which is the top brown unit there. If I could manage to get another Pro Tools system here with another Prism that was recording at 44.1 at 16-bit, the best results would be if I played out of one Prism analog into the other. There's no digital conversion going on there. That would be the best way of doing it. I've got another 192 there, but again it's attached to the same Pro Tools system. I do have Logic running on a laptop with a Motu interface, and that would be a good way of doing it. So you're avoiding digital conversion there. It's sometimes better to go to play out nicely at analog. You know, analog is the universal converter. You can convert anything to anything. All you do is you effectively lose a generation of conversion along the way. So those are your options. And if you are doing a one-stop shop, everything yourself, then I would suggest maybe using a plugin like L3. Which I've got an Arthouse plugin here. This is a Waves plugin. Oh, I haven't got it installed yet. We'll use L2 for a minute. And L3 is a multi-band limiter. L2 is just a wideband limiter, but it does the process is the same. And what it does is it just takes the very high transients out of the mix and enables you to get a bit of a higher level onto CD. I'll show you.
Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far. You always see the faces that you don't want to see.
Now if you look on the attenuation meter here, you can see where there's gain reduction happening.
Most of them don't want to be, but most of them are. There's usually a reason, but there hasn't been one so far.
And this is the limit of the output. At the moment that's set at 0 dB. And I normally just bring that down a fraction actually, just out of superstition. And to listen to a loud point in the song, just to see if the gain is, if that gain reduction is ruling it a bit. It's very difficult because obviously if you bypass it just gets quieter and things tend to sound better when they're louder, so you've got to listen quite carefully to see it. My snare drum's coming through nice and loud there, so if I just turn it down a little bit and then put the plug in on. See, I can hear the snare drum has been subdued back into the mix a little bit, so perhaps I'll just halve the amount that's happening. That's not too bad. I can still hear the transients of the drums. There's 2 or 3 dBs of attenuation going on, which means it's going to be a bit louder onto the CD. And we're going to bounce out to 16-bit, so we can set that here. Dither and noise shaping. Here we've got none, type 1 and type 2. Dither is a weird and wonderful thing whereby because you're going from 24 bits to 16 bits, the actual the length of the digital word that describes each sample is being shortened, and it all gets a bit kind of weird and esoteric here, and I don't actually understand exactly what's going on myself, but what happens is that there's a type of wideband distortion that's introduced to the signal which smooths out the effect of removing some of those bits. You can hear it much more on, if you were recording a classical piece that had a kind of long, smooth reverb tail, you'd notice that if you went from 24 to 16-bit, as it kind of died out, you'd hear a bit of a kind of at the bottom end. And introducing this dither, this noise, actually helps smooth that out. With loud rock music, it's not really that much of an issue, and type 1 is a kind of one-size-fits-all dither that just helps the process out. And shaping again. Right, we're back. Checked our facts, and we were right. I find this really confusing, and I've actually written a couple of articles about it, and each time I've done it, I've had to go back and just check beforehand. Dither is, as we said, a way of dealing with the fact that we're removing a bunch of bits from the word that describes the sample. So we're going from 24-bit to 16-bit. It introduces some kind of noise signal that smooths out the distortion that happens at the bottom. And we have a noise shaping option here, and again, it just affects the type of dithering that's done. And we have a moderate and a normal and an ultra setting here. The difference with noise shaping and dither is actually when you listen, if you actually turn, when the track's off and you just turn your output up really loudly and you've got your hiss, that will actually change the quality of the hiss. So it actually introduces audible noise into the signal, and it will have benefits on different types of music. Again, you won't really notice with a rock track like this, it's virtually irrelevant. If you have a dynamic piece with passages that are almost silent, then you'll need to experiment with that and just pick the right one. And normal is the best option here. And so actually now you've got a master limiter on, you're going to get a pretty nice loud level onto CD. You're quantizing to 16 bits. You can go to bounce to disk, set your options, and hit bounce. And that's your track finally mixed. So here we are at the end. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you for our next masterclass. Right.